All right, so I've been watching new Ken Burns Vietnam, um, series, American Experience, whatever type of situation on PBS, and I can already tell that it's not going to do this like all the other ones don't do, which is explain actually what happened in Vietnam. Because I also watched some whatever the Khan Academy, the sort of online guy who does different things, and it was straight up out of, you know, uh, you know, Martha Rabovitz's 1979 lecture at NYU on Vietnam, and nothing has changed. It's the same playbook, and they don't actually look at what the events objectively. So to be quick and concise, Viet Vietnam, the Gulf of Tonkin. There were two incidents. The first is accepted as having really happened. The second is questionable. Maybe it didn't happen. Okay, but there was a provocative attack by North Vietnam against the United States Navy. Okay, in 1964. Now the the conflict begins. Um, Remember, first of all, the conflict was started by Kennedy. Eisenhower, whose VP was Richard Milhouse Nixon, had stayed out of Vietnam. Right? It was a heated period. It was the Second Indochina War. France was, deep in there. You have Dien Bien Phu. You have all that stuff. America stays completely out of it. Right? I mean, um, I think almost like it's not maybe the it just as an aside, I guess, but somewhat related. Think the Falklands War, 1982, with Reagan and Thatcher, right, in the UK, and they're being challenged, right? America stays out of it. America stayed out also of the Second Indochina War with France and Vietnam. Um, okay, so the main points I'm going to make are two. One, Vietnam, North Vietnam, and the Viet Cong in South Vietnam were defeated militarily. This is what is always missed. It's never they they still kind of stick to the idea of never lost a battle, lost the war concept, that we all know about. For Vietnam, it's never lost a battle, lost the war. So like the left, PBS, Ken Burns, they still stick to that, but they're trying to kind of push back at that, I think, and because from what I see, like that principle is they're really trying to make it kind of edge out on 50-50. Like we were defeated militarily. The United States was defeated militarily. It's not true. Um, the the Viet Cong was after the Tet Offensive in '68 were wiped out. They were wiped out. The head of the Phoenix program, the CIA counter, um, you know, guerrilla campaign in '68 before Tet, he needs an armored convoy of about 100 vehicles to just go from one village to the next in South Vietnam. By 1972, the head of the Phoenix program is traveling by himself in an unarmored jeep from village to village in the countryside. Mao, Chairman Mao himself, said he couldn't understand what happened with America and Vietnam. He said, you had it won. And they did. The countryside was pacified. The Viet Cong was destroyed after Tet. They went all in on the Tet offensive and they were annihilated. Nobody really, listen, I've taken courses and talked to tons of people about this. No one contests that. No one's ever been like, no, they weren't. They were. The Viet Cong was destroyed in the Tet offensive. They never recovered from that. So, and you can also see this in what happens next. The Viet Cong, the North Vietnamese, switch to a conventional war. The Easter Offensive in 1972 is a full-on conventional attack. Okay, with tanks, it's an armored attack. They don't have much of an air force, obviously, but other than that, it is a conventional attack Most of the American troops are out at this point. It's the defense is with American air power and American advisors, but the grunts, the average soldier, or all of the average soldiers are South Vietnamese troops. And the excuse me, that switch is representative of the North, of Hanoi, realizing that the guerrilla war is over. They went all in. They were annihilated. It's 4 years later. This is going to be what they're going to do. They realize that the situation is coming to an end. They're going to launch a full, scale conventional war minus the air force they really don't have, the air element they really don't have, and they're going to try to win that way because it hasn't worked in the guerrilla campaign. And they are decisively defeated. And this is important to remember, by the South Vietnamese, with American advisors and air power, but with South Vietnamese troops. So after that point, the North Vietnamese go to Paris, they go to the peace negotiations in Paris, and they agree to every single condition of the Americans for peace. They say it's a total unilateral. Yes, you've made conditions. We agree to every single one of them. And during that period, there is an intense bombing of North Vietnam that had been held back. Because that's the other thing you have to always remember. We call it the Vietnam War, and I think some people get kind of touchy about this. But my dad himself, who fought in Vietnam, told me when I took a course in community college about this, and I found it because I knew he had been there, but I didn't really know anything. And he told me it wasn't really a war. And he said, and then he also said Korea wasn't really a war. And he's right, because the Congress did not declare war. It was not actually a war. And if you look at it, and if you look at Korea in both those cases, they were not wars, and that explains the outcomes as well. Um, but anyway, so the so they lose the Easter Offensive. That's decisively defeated. They're destroyed in '72. They agree to all the peace terms, and there's a stepped-up bombing campaign, which I believe is called Operation Linebacker. There's a operation to really reinforce South Vietnam with depots of different munitions that can be easily people can come back in and be ready to go immediately if there is any mass invasion. And they agreed to everything, all of the American conditions for peace. And then what happens is Watergate. And Watergate, remember, Nixon was cheated out of the 1960 election by Kennedy. Mafia connections with his dad, labor connections, and LBJ, who ballot stuffed and rigged the vote in Texas, which is why he was on the ticket. And he becomes the president, and Kennedy is assassinated instead of Nixon, who would have stayed out of Vietnam because he was on board with the Eisenhower agenda in terms of Vietnam. So Nixon gets stuck with Vietnam, and very much so. I mean, I don't think anyone argues that. He got stuck with this thing. And so he has it decisively won. Peace with honor is what he said. And Watergate happens. Ted Kennedy, the Democrats, cut off all funding for South Vietnam under the sort of pretense the South Vietnamese really don't have the will to fight. But they've just defeated a mass North Vietnamese conventional attack in the '72 Easter Offensive with American advisors and air power, but as them being the troops. And they've lost several 100,000, at least a couple 100,000. The estimates go way over that at this point, dead. And they cut off all funding for the South Vietnamese as a Democrat initiative, um, with this idea that they're just abandoning their weapons anyway and they don't care, which was not true. So that's the actual history.